Nice code. What do these words mean? They can be a compliment, an ironic slap in the face, or they might mean nothing at all. How do you find the meaning, especially when you're working on GitHub and dealing with the GitHub effect? GitHub is, of course, the open source code repository that has become something of a community center for the rising generation of programmers and software developers. It's where these individuals go for information, particularly technical information about what they're trying to do. In the past, they might have read books, they might have gone to journals, they might have contacted professors, or even sat down with a search engine to see what they could find. Now, they log into GitHub. And while they're there, they follow Twitter streams that talks of forks and merges, of puts and commits. This seems to be the site that is especially attractive to people who don't have a full formal training, whose education has not left them with enough information to do the work they need to do. And so they log onto GitHub and get that information from their peers. GitHub has not only become the place where people go to develop software, it's also the place we now go to study software development, to learn how programmers work and how they create software products. GitHub collects a great deal of data, and researchers have been very quick to start mining that data to see what they could learn. There are already conferences and publications devoted to this subject. So far, their claims are fairly modest. We know, for example, that most of the active workers on GitHub are employed by companies that are involved in computer services or sometimes computer software. We know that they work in a relatively small number of major cities. And we know that a relatively small percentage of the people on GitHub do the bulk of the work. Finally, we also know that they tend to like to work during the night, but that they produce their best work, their best code, when they submit it during the day. Traditionally, work and the workplace have been very difficult topics to study. One of the reasons for this is a phenomenon that is known as the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect is merely the activity that happens when workers know that they're being studied. They adjust their habits and their actions to meet the expectations of the researchers. They obviously don't want any bad reports going to their supervisors. It's named after the old Hawthorne electric plant, which used to be located in the western suburbs of Chicago. It was owned by Western Electric and was a major supplier to the original AT&T, the old Bell system. During the 1920s and 1930s, it was a major site for the study of work. The sociologist who did these studies was named Elton Mayo, and he was very concerned that people were rushing into the workplace, armed, as he said, with nothing more than a smattering of the scientific method. And they were leaping to conclusions that were not true because they did not understand the subtlety of human association. They did not understand that people work in communities, and those communities support the workers and also defend them from outside influences. Now, the Hawthorne effect is still a controversial subject within sociology. Some sociologists don't believe it exists. Others believe that it's so prevalent that it is impossible to make an honest study of work and the workplace. We might claim that GitHub was immune from the Hawthorne effect because everything on the site is done in public. There's no distinction between when you are watched and when you're not being watched. While the site does have private repositories, it charges extra for those repositories, and hence the majority of software on the site is fully public. Even visitors to the site are monitored. When I was doing my research, I drew the attention of two developers. One, a nice young man, wanted to know if I'd like to see a demo of his code. The other, a young woman, wanted to know if I might help with the coding. In all, it was like going down a street and watching people go about their business. They were assembling a community of people around them to help them do their work. But they were doing that in the larger structure of human association, with all its subtleties and with all its complexities. It was not a place where you went to draw attention. Indeed, some of the developers didn't necessarily want attention. GitHub was, last month, subject to a denial of service attack because outsiders didn't like what a couple of the developers were doing. Our modern social media has left us with the lesson that society is largely about popularity, largely about likes and approval, about doing things to gain the attention of others and trying to get them to reward us with that attention. In fact, when we work in a complex society, we often have to carve out a place of anonymity, a place where we can work without being disturbed by others. In the tight and complex societies of cities, we go down the street without making eye contact. We wear the same clothes as others. We pass people on the street that we may see a dozen or even hundreds of times and hardly recognize that they are there beyond the phrase, "good day," "nice to see you," or some other phrase that means nothing at all other than the recognition of that person's humanity and your desire to be left alone. When we are doing coding in a social setting, we too need that space. And so the phrase "nice code" may be a compliment or an ironic bit of criticism, or it might be just that little phrase that says, "I recognize that you are there, and now will you please leave me alone." This is David Allen Greer for the Errant hashtag. Take care.